Jim, Jane and I are back from your 50th Alive Day, and it was a good one. And we're glad to see that you could celebrate 50 years of living after that terrible tragedy you had in Vietnam and could have died as easily as lived. And we're sorry we haven't made some of them before. As you know, we used to go to all your Alive Days, and then 25 years ago we moved away from DC. So your last one that we attended was your 25th Alive Day. And each year you sent invitations, and each year we replied, not this year, but we'll make your 50th. Well, we would have never done that if we actually thought you would have lived to be 50, have 50 of these. But we're here. We were there. And it was a great experience. And now we're convinced that if you stay healthy, we'll be at your Diamond Jubilee. And just a couple of comments about your Alive Day this year. They certainly were different in the old days. Having it at a place like Morton's, for example, certainly was a way step down from some of those places we used to have your Alive Day, like Dirty Annie's and pubs that could only be entered from the alley. But it was okay. And the only other thing that was kind of sad is not too many of our Vietnam era vets were there. I know some of them have passed on and will never be at another party, and others couldn't make it. But on the other hand, we were exhilarated by all the young wounded warriors there that you had met at Walter Reed. And as we gone through the crowd, you could tell the admiration that they had for you. And to the person, from fighter pilot to ground pounder, they would say, Jim Mayer was the first person that came to visit me at my bed. Jim Mayer was the first person to bring me a milkshake at Walter Reed. And Jim, this is quite a thing. It's just didn't have words for it, but you've just done a wonderful thing, and these vets love you for it. But in the old days, there would have been an opportunity that folks could get up and say a few words. And Jane and I were talking. You've known these veterans, these young vets, since they were at bedside in Walter Reed. You probably know their whole military story, perhaps their hometown, their first car, and yet they may not know about you or enough about you. Now that was a great article in the DAV magazine. It told a lot about your military and what you're doing today, but it left a big gap in there. And so if I'd had the opportunity to speak the other night, I might have told these young vets a couple of things that they didn't know about you. For example, I would say, Jim Mayer, after he got out of the military and had his medical rehab, he attended college. And he was a fighting Red Hawk from SEMO State. Now, for those of you that don't know all the directional colleges, that's Southeast Missouri State, Cape Girardeau. And back in the day of the Vietnam era, GI Bill wasn't working so well. Veterans were having trouble getting approved for it, they weren't getting paid, and there became a need for an organization. And Jim was a part of that organization, National Association of Collegiate Veterans, NACV. And they fought in this arena. But then they graduated. And he and his fellow veterans, they had this concerned look on their face. And they were concerned because they couldn't get a job. So they renamed their organization the National Association of Concerned Vets, still NACV. And Guy McMichael, who was at your party Saturday night, can tell you that when NACV marched on Capitol Hill, they were every bit as successful as they were in Vietnam. Now, I want to talk about some of the early Alive Day parties. We had these at Jim's house, and they were good parties. He was a great host. And one thing you remembered about Jim's house, he was probably the first person in the DC area, if not the first, one of the first, to have a VCR, VHS video recorder, and it was about the size of a microwave. Big. It cost $1,000 in those days. And Jim, I looked it up, that would be $4,500 in today's dollars. But you were the man of the thing, and we loved you for it. And we had these parties at Jim's house. But then one year, someone taped over one of his Steve Martin movies, Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. And he banned us all from his house, never to come back, and we had to start having them in these places like Dirty Annie's and pubs without names and alleys. But Jim, after all these years, I want to confess, I was the one that taped over your movie. And since you're a wild and crazy guy, I thought I should make it up to you. And I have for you, and I will be sending it to you, Steve Martin, VHS, Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. Now here on the back of it, you can ignore this sticker that says return to Errol's by such and such a date. Just ignore that. But in the event that you do want to return it, I have also put you a subway ticket on there from the 70s or 80s so that you could take it back. So enjoy watching this, Jim, and I'm sorry that I ever taped over your old one. Now there's another story I think I should tell. This is the first year that Sergeant Shaft hasn't been with us, and he sometimes used the AKA John Fales. But there was a time back when both you, John, and I were all single. There weren't many times like that, but this was one of the times. The three of us had dinner up on M Street at a nice little Italian joint, and then we decided to walk down to the Greenery. Now the Greenery was new. It was one of the hottest places in town, and it was a fern bar. Every place with these big potted plants with ferns coming out of it. Well, we walked into that place, and immediately 4 young ladies jumped up from a table and came over. They knew Jim. All we knew is that Jim said they were flight attendants. Did he introduce us? No, neither John or myself. He took the 4 ladies, went to a table, and left John and I at the bar to drink. Well, finally, I look over at John, and those of you who don't know, John is totally blind and had a lot to drink that night. He was talking to a hanging fern, and he was having a heck of a conversation with it. And so I was just there by myself, kind of moping. And then all of a sudden, one of the ladies from the table got up, and she came over to me, and I thought things were looking up. And she asked me, "Is Jim single?" And I said, "Absolutely not." I said, "Jim's not a single. He's a double below the knees." And Jim, I believe to this day, if you'd have had a leg to stand on, you would have had one of those little cards that would allow you to fly anywhere around the world that Allegheny Airline goes. And the last story I want to tell, because Jim was a great bowler. And in our bowling league, again there at your Live Day parties Thursday night, Mike Hughes was there, Jack Frost, they were both great bowlers. And then there were bowlers like my wife and I, Jane and I, who could barely break 100. But one night when we were going into our league out at Navy Bethesda, the manager runs up to us and he says, "Guess just what happened?" We said, "We don't know." He says, "Jim just shot some high score, I don't even remember what it was, a series into the 700s or the 800. Just great." And he says, "You know what makes it so fantastic?" We say, "What?" And he says, "Jim doesn't have any legs." And that's just really quite a feat. And I said, "Yeah, but he doesn't have any legs, but he still has his real feet. And that really gives him good traction, gives him a real advantage, particularly at bowling." And he looked at me and he says, "Oh, I didn't know that," as he walked away defeated. And so that was a good story, Jim. There are a lot more I could tell. But the one thing I want to focus on is that in this 50 years, you've accomplished a lot. You've helped a lot of veterans, both as an employee at the VA, service organizations, other volunteer organizations, and I can't think of anybody that I know of that has done more for these young disabled vets. But again, focusing back on you, this is Jim Mayer's Alive Day. The focus should be on you. I want you to not just focus that you've lived for 50 years. I want you to focus on what you have been through, and particularly with the VA, Think back in the day when you were trying to get your compensation, you were trying to get your GI Bill, and then when you worked at the VA, you were trying to get all of us employees to stay awake. And then when you worked at a service organization, again, you were trying to get the VA to produce. And then again, as a volunteer and helping all these young vets get their benefits. You had to suffer through this with the VA. And just think about your own medical conditions, all the shrapnel, the operations, all the things that you've been through. So if you focus on all of that, Jim, I really think what impresses me the most, and I'm going to show you right here, is Jim Mayer has survived the VA for 50 years. And Jim, this t-shirt and this VH tape will be in the mail to you, and we'll see you at your Diamond Jubilee. Have a great day.